What's good? High noon. How do you get rid of the porn at its core? How do you address the root issue of the porn addiction? What we do here at High Noon is we help people be ready for marriage, to be ready for matching, to be ready for the blessing. And one of the largest roadblocks that we face in our ministry is individuals that have unwanted, I repeat, unwanted porn, masturbation, habits, addictions. And the natural progression of growth that people go through in our programs is one that looks like this. They come to us in need of support with an unwanted behavior. They wonder why they continue for years and sometimes decades engaging in porn and masturbation, even though, I might add, that they hate the behavior, that they're a man or woman of faith that has high standards and values, and yet they keep going back to the behavior. And after people spend some time with us, they realize very quickly that the root of the behavior is not what they thought. They thought for many years, for a long time, that the reason I have this behavior is because I have a high sex drive, I'm a sexual perverted freak of nature, I'm a weirdo, I am the absolute worst, and I'm unworthy of God and love and the blessing and all that stuff, right? And then they realize, oh, there's actually possibly a deeper reason to this. And that's what we're getting to here, right? Because it's one of the most insightful and frequent questions that we get from people in the High Noon world is, how do I, first of all, identify, and then second of all, address the root issue? And so I'm going to make this simple for y'all. I'm not going to overcomplicate it, because if you overcomplicate it, then you're not going to take action. And the most complicated answer that most people will give is, well, the root of all dysfunction and unwanted behavior in the world is feeling a lack of love, which is true. You don't feel God. You don't feel God's unconditional love. You don't feel that you are worthy of love. That is true. However, what I have noticed and observed is that when you go straight to that answer, it does not resonate with people. It does not hit home for people. Why? Because it's the same as a teacher getting on the blackboard and writing out a complicated equation and then telling you the answer point blank. This is the answer, without taking you linearly step by step through the process of why the problem results in the solution, or why the root issue is as at the core of the issue that's being manifested. And so without understanding logically, heartfeltly, why your porn habit is manifesting in the way it is, you won't be able to understand the root issue. And so saying you don't feel love is not helpful, even though it's true. All right, so let's take it more step-by-step approach. The simpler way to answer this question is really, what emotions do you feel that tend to leading you to want to escape? Because if you break down the fundamental reason as to why you use porn, even though you don't want to, is because porn is the ultimate escape. So is any drug. So is cocaine. So is heroin. So is video games. So is social media. So is your phone. And because it's an ultimate escape, you have to ask the really smart question, which is, what am I escaping from? And if you can figure that out, then you can start to address it. So what are you running from that is so painful that requires you, quote unquote, to need porn in your life just to soothe? And if you can identify one or two, it's usually not more than two big emotions that people tend to soothe through the use of porn. For example, big one for a lot of people is stress. Big one is anxiety. A big one is loneliness. And a big one is boredom. All right? And it's helpful to create in your mind a bucket, like to categorize my porn addiction is rooted in my inability to deal with an emotion, which is a more accurate way of describing an addiction, because an addiction is formed when you have an unpleasant, difficult emotion or trauma or life circumstance, and you link it with some kind of supernormal activity, some hyperactive supernormal behavior that you go to when you feel that emotion. And that's how every addiction is formed. So at the very fundamental level, you feel an emotion and you have never learned from a very young age how to deal with that emotion. That is all that's going on, okay? And you can psychoanalyze yourself and say, oh, I go to porn because when I was a child, this happened, whatever. It doesn't really help. You could say, oh, it's spirit world, the devil's on my shoulder and I crouching at my doorstep and I don't know how to deal with it because of spiritual factors. You could say that into oblivion, but it's not helpful, as you know, because the actions that follow aren't very helpful, right? If you just say, oh, it's 100% a spiritual issue, then what can you do about it, right? But if you say, oh, the more accurate thing is, I just have a dependency on porn to deal with the emotion of loneliness, and in those moments where I'm lonely, I tend to want to isolate instead of connect, okay? In those moments of I'm bored, instead of doing something creative, finding an outlet to utilize for my benefit to deal with the emotion of boredom, instead you isolate. Instead of dealing with stress in a way that's productive, that God gave you the emotion to be dealt with, which is to act, which is to, in some ways, move forward despite the feeling of stress or fear, instead you choose to isolate. And so this is where the love part comes in. This is where the connection part comes in. What it really boils down to, of all the men and women that we work with in our programs to deal with porn addiction, it really comes down to this simple decision, the micro decision of when you feel something, how do you respond to that emotion? When you feel lonely, what do you do? And fundamentally, there are two forks. It's you isolate or you connect. The connect option is the route to victory. The isolate option is the route to starting with, I'm just going to go into my room and go on my phone. I'm going to go play some video games. I'm going to go on social media, which sounds really innocent, but that's really where it starts. And the wise option, what we train people to do, what you need to train yourself to do, is to, in that moment, recognize, oh yes, this is that time where I don't know how to deal with this emotion, and I never really learned how to deal with the difficult emotion, and instead, I'm going to connect. What does connect mean? It means doing one of three things that we've always done throughout all of history, okay? It means, number one, move your body. Number two is you internalize, or number three is you connect with someone, you share with someone. Number one, move your body, is exercise, running, take a run, do some jumping jacks, do some push-ups, play a sport, hunt a lion, that kind of thing. It's a better way to deal with emotions. It's not the best way. I'll tell you why. Because you're not actually internalizing the emotion itself. You're kind of distracting yourself, which is not the worst thing to do. But eventually it's going to bubble up again and surface, and you have to deal with it. So the second way to deal with an emotion that we've always done historically is to internalize, which means introspection through prayer, meditation, journaling, just being out in nature. Sleep is a form of introspection, right? Just to sleep it off, which is also a great way to deal with emotion, but there's actually one that's better than both of those, which is to connect with somebody. Because when you talk with somebody, you not only deal with the emotion, but also you're able to internalize how you want to deal with the emotion better next time. And the added benefit, the bonus, which is the key, is that you're able to be seen by somebody. You're able to connect with a human and experience that love we're talking about. That's the unconditional love of God that we're breathing here in High Noon. And so if you can see it through that lens of when you feel an emotion, think about your ancestors living 100,000, 10,000 years ago. How did they deal with emotions? Well, they didn't have on that list access to a phone. They didn't go to a screen. They didn't go to Netflix. They didn't go to social media, Instagram, YouTube. They basically only had very few options. And those are healthier ways of managing and dealing with emotions, period. End of story. Okay, so once you've identified the single or maybe two primary difficult emotions that are not bad, I might add, they're not inherently wrong or evil. They're actually given to you by God. Ooh, amazing! Revelation! This is crazy. We have been fooled to believe that emotions are bad and wrong and evil and should be medicated. Are you feeling sad? Are you lonely? Are you horny? You need to medicate yourself to death, because that's the only way to deal with these emotions. It's not wrong. It's not bad. In fact, if you didn't feel these emotions, something would be wrong with you, and I'd be a little bit concerned, right? Don't you think? Don't you think a little loneliness is sometimes helpful to get us to move, to connect with someone, to find our partner and have children? Don't you think boredom is a little necessary at times to get us off of our butt and create something and stop living in our house? Don't you think stress is a little important sometimes so that we will actually fight for the people that we love and protect ourselves and the people that we love dearly in our lives? Don't you think Anxiety is a little bit helpful so that we can plan for the future. But if you're afraid, my friends, it is indicative that courage is necessary. Because if you didn't need courage, you wouldn't feel fearful. If you didn't feel fearful, you wouldn't care about the thing. The reason you feel fearful is because you care about the thing that you need to take action towards. There's a reason you're feeling fearful. There's a reason that you're giving power, giving weight, giving strength to that action that you need to take. So see fear as a blessing. See fear as, oh yes, thank you, fear. Thank you. Thank God for fear. Thank God for all the difficult emotions. I'm not talking about a deep psychological fear. I'm talking more about a biological fear that even animals have, right? Babies have fear. Children have fear. I'm talking about the fear that is probably given to us by God to help us, motivate us to take good action that is good for us, that is good for the people around us. I'm not talking about the fear, the psychological fear that is induced by and riddled with self-loathing and lack of love. You gotta ask yourself, are you acting out of fear or are you acting out of love? Are you doing the actions that you have in your life because you love your spouse or because you're afraid? You want to get blessed because you love God, you love the blessing, you love your parents, or because you're afraid of the consequences of not doing that? Yeah? We must act out of love and not fear. So, figure out the root issue, address it little by little, and before you know it, just label yourself not as I am an addict, which is the worst thing to do. Just say it more accurately. It's like, I have an addictive tendency to go to certain behaviors like porn and masturbation when I feel difficult emotions. That is a more accurate description of what's going on. Because as soon as you start labeling yourself as I am an addict, think about what that does to you subconsciously. Wake up every day, look in the mirror and say, I am an addict. You have an addiction. You're not an addict. That is not your identity. Do not identify with being something that's so degenerate and self-centered. It's not who you are. You are not an addict. You are not an addict. I understand the reason that AA 12-step programs do this. Do you know why? One of the first things they get you to say is to say, I am an addict. Why do they do that? It's for you to understand that you have a problem, which is true. But people misunderstand that, and they believe that that's the fundamental thing that is needed in order to be an addiction, is to say, I am an addict. That's not the point of why people say that. That's not the point of why 12-step programs include that in their program. It's so that you will see that there is a problem and to admit that you need help. That's the benefit of doing it. It's not to label yourself. So don't label yourself. One of the greatest life hacks I can give you guys right now is to label yourself accurately. Label yourself what you actually are already. Which is a son or daughter of God that is loved, that is trying to use certain behaviors to deal with difficult emotions, as we all are. Congratulations, welcome to humanity. You may be suffering from being a human being. And you need the high noon medication, which is a good medication, by the way. All right, lots of love to you guys. You're loved more than you know. See you in the next video. Peace.